The screen fades in, and the first question hits like a slap. What happens when a documentary doesn't accuse anyone directly, but lets the internet do the accusing for it? That's exactly where this story begins. Not with a courtroom, not with a sworn statement, but with a new documentary, a few carefully edited scenes, and a name that suddenly lit up social media like a match thrown into gasoline. Meghan Markle. Trending. Again. And this time, not because of a speech, a royal appearance, or even a podcast deal, but because viewers believe they were connecting dots that, until now, had only lived in the darker corners of online forums. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Within hours of the documentary's release, reaction videos exploded. Comment sections turned vicious. Headlines became suggestive without ever saying anything outright. And one phrase kept popping up again and again. They're finally saying what everyone whispered. But are they? Here's the part most people missed. The documentary never names Meghan. Not once. It never shows her. It never accuses her of anything illegal, immoral, or explicit. And yet, somehow, she became the face of the controversy overnight. How does that happen? Who benefits when a story is implied rather than stated? And why does ambiguity sometimes hit harder than accusation? This is where things get uncomfortable, because this story isn't really about yachts, or money, or even celebrity rumors. It's about how narratives are constructed, how suggestion becomes belief, and how fast the public can turn implication into conviction. Think about it. When a documentary uses shadowy reenactments, when it overlays anonymous quotes, when it flashes luxury images while talking about unnamed figures and unspoken arrangements, your brain fills in the blanks. Mine does too. That's not an accident. That's design. And suddenly, people weren't asking, is this true? They were asking, why hasn't she responded? Silence became suspicious. Neutral statements were dissected like confessions. Old photos resurfaced. Innocent timelines were reframed as evidence. Even moments from years ago were dragged back into the light and reinterpreted with a darker tone. So ask yourself this. If a story never says your name, but the world decides it's about you anyway, how do you fight that? Because here's what makes this moment different from every past controversy. This didn't come from tabloids. It didn't start with paparazzi. It came wrapped in the language of serious documentary filmmaking. And that gave it credibility before anyone stopped to ask the most important question of all. What if the real story isn't what the documentary shows, but what it very carefully refuses to say? And just when the backlash reached its peak, something unexpected happened behind the scenes, something that shifted this from online noise into a much bigger problem. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It opens with luxury. Sunlight bouncing off deep blue water. Champagne flutes clinking. A slow pan across the deck of a yacht so polished, it almost looks unreal. And then the narrator drops a line that feels innocent on the surface, but dangerous underneath. Some stories don't need names. They need recognition. That's when viewers lean forward. Because this documentary plays a clever game. It never accuses. It never points. It never names. Instead, it invites the audience to participate, to connect dots, to feel smart, to believe they're uncovering something hidden in plain sight. And that's where the trouble begins. The filmmakers rely heavily on suggestion. Former industry insiders speak in vague terms. Faces are blurred, voices distorted. Phrases like a well-known figure, someone who later reinvented herself, and a public transformation that erased a past are repeated again and again. No proof offered. No timelines confirmed. Just implication layered on implication. And here's the psychological trick. When people think they've discovered something on their own, they defend it harder. They don't feel manipulated. They feel enlightened. So when online sleuths started posting side-by-side screenshots, comparing old travel photos, red carpet appearances, and yacht footage that wasn't even from the same decade, it spread fast. Very fast. Not because it was verified, but because it was exciting. Let me ask you something. When was the last time a rumor this explosive spread without a single direct claim being made? That's the genius and the danger of this format. The documentary even includes a segment about how rumors are born. Ironically, it explains how speculation can ruin lives, how unnamed women were often targeted in the past, and yet, it immediately cuts to visuals that fuel exactly that behavior. Luxury ports, Mediterranean coastlines, anonymous silhouettes stepping onto private boats, contradiction stacked on contradiction. And then there's the editing. Long pauses after certain lines. Music drops out at just the right moment. A lingering shot held half a second too long. These are not accidents. These are choices. Emotional cues telling your brain when to feel suspicious, when to feel shocked, when to lean in. Social media did the rest. Clips were cut out of context. Thumbnails were made with exaggerated expressions. Commentary channels added their own spin, pushing the narrative further with each retelling. And suddenly, a documentary about an industry became, in the public mind, a documentary about one woman. But here's the part no one talks about. The legal shield. By never naming anyone, the filmmakers protect themselves. They can always say, "We never said that." Responsibility shifts to the audience, to the commentators, to the reaction channels. Plausible deniability becomes armor. So where does that leave the person at the center of the storm? Because silence looks like guilt, denial looks defensive, and responding at all risks amplifying a story that technically doesn't exist. This is the trap. And according to people watching closely, this is exactly the moment when things started happening quietly behind closed doors. Calls were made, advisors were consulted, and a strategy began forming that suggested this controversy was far from over. Because what happened next wasn't public outrage. It was something much more calculated. And once you understand that move, you'll realize this documentary was only the beginning. Here's where the story takes a sharp turn. Because while the internet was spiraling, while reaction videos multiplied by the hour and speculation hardened into belief, something else was happening. Something quieter. Something far more deliberate. Nothing. No statement. No denial. No carefully worded clarification. Just silence. And that silence drove people insane. You've seen this pattern before, haven't you? When a celebrity speaks too fast, they're accused of lying. When they wait, they're accused of hiding. And when they say nothing at all, the narrative fills the vacuum like smoke in a sealed room. Within days, that vacuum became a backlash machine. Commentators began saying things like, "If it wasn't about her, why hasn't she said that?" Others claimed, "Her team always responds quickly. This time is different." Old interviews were rewatched with a new lens. Harmless quotes were reframed as foreshadowing. Even body language experts jumped in, analyzing clips from completely unrelated events. Let's pause right there. Why does silence feel louder than words? Because in the age of instant response, stillness feels unnatural. And when something feels unnatural, people assume it's intentional. Behind the scenes, however, silence isn't absence. It's a tactic. PR insiders have a name for it: strategic non-engagement. The idea is simple but risky. If you respond to an implication, you legitimize it. You drag a rumor out of the shadows and place it under a spotlight. But if you say nothing, the story may burn itself out. That's the gamble. And here's the contradiction. The same documentary that warned about rumor culture was now being fueled by it, amplified by creators who insisted they were just asking questions. Questions that were repeated so often they stopped sounding like questions at all. At the same time, a second wave of criticism emerged. Not about the allegations, but about the documentary itself. Viewers began pointing out inconsistencies, timelines that didn't align, locations that didn't match the era being discussed, stock footage reused in multiple contexts, anonymous sources making claims that conveniently couldn't be verified. Suddenly, the internet split in two. One side said, "This confirms everything people suspected." The other said, "This proves how easily people are manipulated." And right in the middle was a public figure who still hadn't said a word. Ask yourself this. If you were advised to stay silent, how long could you hold that line while your reputation was debated in real time? Because silence has a shelf life. And here's the part that changes everything. While the public believed nothing was happening, reports began circulating that legal teams were quietly reviewing the documentary frame by frame. Not to sue, not to threaten, but to understand something far more important. Intent. What was the documentary really designed to do? Expose truth? Or provoke engagement at any cost? And just as that internal review reached a critical point, a new development surfaced. One that suggested this story wasn't going to fade quietly into the algorithm. It was about who funded the project. And once that question was asked, the entire narrative shifted. The moment someone asked, "Who paid for this?" the temperature of the conversation changed. Because documentaries don't appear out of thin air. They're funded, approved, greenlit. And when a project generates this much controversy while carefully avoiding direct accusations, the funding trail suddenly matters more than the footage itself. Here's the first surprise. The production company behind the film wasn't known for investigative exposés. Its past catalog leaned heavily toward sensational lifestyle content. High engagement, strong visuals, viral reach. Less about court-proof facts, more about conversation-driving narratives. That alone raised eyebrows. Then came the second surprise. Several executive producers had previously worked on projects that were criticized for blurring the line between commentary and insinuation. Projects that never lost lawsuits because they never made claims concrete enough to challenge. Projects that thrived on ambiguity, coincidence, or a business model. Ask yourself this. If outrage equals clicks, and clicks equal revenue, where does truth fit into that equation? As online researchers dug deeper, patterns emerged. The documentary was released during a slow news cycle. Teaser clips were seeded to reaction channels days before the official premiere. Influencers with a history of controversial takes were given early access. Not neutral reviewers, not skeptics, but personalities known for lighting matches. That's not exposure. That's orchestration. And suddenly, the silence from the person at the center of the storm made more sense. Because responding to a coordinated narrative can actually strengthen it. You don't argue with smoke. You look for the fire source. But here's where it gets even more uncomfortable. Some viewers noticed the documentary's language shifted subtly depending on the platform promoting it. One trailer emphasized empowerment. Another leaned into scandal. Another teased untold truths. Same footage, different framing, different audience triggers. Why tailor the message if the goal is simple storytelling? Because the real product isn't the documentary. It's the reaction. Every angry comment, every defensive post, every debunking video, every speculative thread, all of it feeds the same machine. The louder the argument, the higher the visibility. And the more visibility, the less the creators have to clarify anything at all. Now think about the position this creates. A public figure facing a narrative that's profitable precisely because it's unresolved. Too vague to sue. Too suggestive to ignore. Too viral to outweight. That's when reports surfaced of something else happening quietly. Conversations not about denial or apology, but about timing. About future projects. About whether responding now would help or hurt what was already planned months in advance. Because here's the twist most people didn't expect. This controversy didn't erupt in a vacuum. It collided with upcoming releases, brand negotiations, and a public image that was already under scrutiny. And that collision created a decision point. Respond and risk amplifying a narrative built on implication. Or stay silent and let the cycle peak on its own. But just when it looked like silence would remain the strategy, something shifted the balance. A single moment. A single leak. A single reaction that wasn't supposed to be public. And once that surfaced, the conversation moved from speculation to something far more personal. Because when image control cracks, even slightly, the fallout doesn't just stay online. And what happened next forced everyone involved to reconsider their next move, fast. It only takes one crack. Not a statement. Not a press release. Not even a denial. Just a moment that feels off. In this case, it was a reaction that wasn't meant to be dissected. A brief exchange. A clipped response. A visible shift in tone during an unrelated appearance that suddenly became the most replayed few seconds online. People slowed it down, zoomed in, compared it to older footage. And once again, the internet did what it always does best. It decided what it meant. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Once a narrative reaches a certain size, control becomes an illusion. It doesn't matter how carefully something was framed. It doesn't matter what was or wasn't said. The story becomes communal property. Everyone owns a piece of it. Everyone reshapes it to fit what they already believe. That's why this moment matters. Because this wasn't just about one documentary or one wave of backlash. It exposed something bigger. How easily suggestion can replace evidence. How quickly silence becomes symbolism. And how profitable ambiguity has become in modern media. Ask yourself this. How many people watched the documentary start to finish? Versus how many formed an opinion based on clips, thumbnails, and commentary? And more importantly, how many people still remember that no accusation was ever made? That's the paradox. The absence of a claim didn't slow the judgment. It accelerated it. For the person at the center of the storm, this wasn't just reputational noise. It was a reminder of how fragile public perception really is. One implication, framed the right way, amplified by the right voices, at the right moment, can undo years of careful image building. And yet, here's the irony. The same machine that builds these storms also moves on quickly. Outrage has a short attention span. Today's controversy becomes tomorrow's forgotten headline. But the impact lingers quietly, influencing opportunities, relationships, and how future stories are received. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a choice as viewers. Do we question how stories are constructed? Do we pause before filling in blanks we were never meant to fill? Or do we keep rewarding content that thrives on implication because it feels more exciting than certainty? Because once you notice the pattern, you start seeing it everywhere. Not just in documentaries, not just with celebrities, but in politics, in social media, in everyday discourse. Stories no longer need proof to spread. They need participation. And that's the final twist. This controversy didn't just reveal something about media tactics or public figures. It revealed something about us. About how quickly we engage, assume, and react when a narrative feels just believable enough. So the next time a story doesn't say a name, but everyone seems to know who it's about, ask yourself why. And if you want more deep dives into how modern narratives are built, twisted, and weaponized, you already know what to do. Subscribe, stay curious, and question the stories that want you to decide before you think. Because the most powerful stories aren't always the ones that shout the loudest. They're the ones that let you do the talking. And once you realize that, you'll never watch a documentary the same way again.